Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson, joined by Brian Gottlieb and his unfortunate, tragic badminton story. Today, we're going to be talking about Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Is that it? People were making fun of us for calling it Champions of Kamigawa.
Did we do that? I mean, I'm sure we did if people said we did.
So it's like 20 years ago, right? So in my mind, whenever I say Kamigawa, like it just auto-completes to Champions because that's what it's been for 20 years. So I'm sorry. Anyway, tragic badminton story. Have you come up with anything yet?
I told you I'm not comfortable talking about that, Gerald. It's not something... I fall into a deep, dark despair every time someone even brings up the game of badminton. So I wish we could talk about something else, like, say, Magic cards.
Well, we could do that. So are there more episodes of that show up? So there's an anime called Salaryman's Club. Is that it?
Yeah, well, it depends on... I think, like, the translation is a little shaky.
Okay.
Something along those lines. I've also seen it shortened in some ways to, like, I don't know, just like the end part of salary. So Allery Man. I don't know why they did that. But yeah, it's a weird anime about a hypothetical world where it seems like much of your job performance is based on your ability to play badminton for the corporate badminton team.
It reminded me of college basketball.
Kind of. It's
right?
Just,
because it's like you get invited to go to these like prestigious schools if you can game. And that's basically what was happening. I don't know. It's better than probably what our description makes it out to be, especially if you enjoy or tolerate the game of badminton.
Yeah, I actually love badminton, and that's not something that comes up very often because it's just like not a widely played game, I guess. I mean, maybe in some pockets it is, but it's like a long game, right? Where you're out in the summertime and you play some casual badminton. I'm looking for high stakes competitive badminton. I just think it's a great game.
I never played outside of high school, but I enjoyed it when we did play in high school.
Maybe since we've been fired from our Magic jobs, we should transition to the world of badminton. We can be a badminton commentary team. I mean, those do exist, although it seems like only for the Olympics, right? Although I'm sure if you like went to YouTube and Twitch, there's probably a thriving badminton scene like there is for every single other thing on the planet. So
literally everything.
Yeah, it's just niche. That's all.
Anyway, there is a point in the story that they
was there? Are you sure?
Yet.
How sure are you about that?
No. In the anime, where like the main character has it's a seemingly tragic badminton accident, for his origin story, and so now Brian was like, that's kind of badass. I'm going to co-op that on my own, and we haven't really fleshed out the details for Brian's tragic backstory, but we'll get there.
I just think it's way more interesting than like my current tragic backstory, which is just like. I don't even know how to define, like, just like had some potential, but decided to not use it. Like that's the extent of my backstory. So, the tragic badminton accident, way more interesting.
It is. And your real backstory, I think a lot of people can relate to, especially the Magic playing folk. But, this way you get to like rewrite your own history, which I think is cool.
Love it.
Anyway, new cards. Wizarding squares, as Brian calls them.
Lots of new wizarding squares. Exciting ones, too, I think. It's weird. My perception of this set is off in some ways, and I think that's because, like, I've seen it before. So this is my first time experiencing that, and to me, it has been exciting, but maybe not as much as it should be, given how good these cards are, I think. I mean, what's your kind of read on what's going on?
Well, we have 216 out of 302 cards, so we're almost done, almost getting there. Close. I think with basically every set, there has been, some card that like sneaks in at the end that ends up having like a pretty big impact that wasn't, officially previewed during preview season or whatever. Like Unholy Heat for MH2 was one of those cards.
Yep.
And I think there was like a Black Sacrifice card that like also did that. I don't think it was Plum. It was like something that was legitimately good that like people were playing. I don't know if it was like iTwitch or whatever, but things sneak in there. So this is definitely not all of the good cards, but yeah, there's plenty of good cards, and we're trying to figure out what cards exactly to talk about this week. And we'd already done a pretty big swath of them, I think, but just like looking at all of these cards and trying to figure out which ones to talk about, it's actually kind of tough. Not because like there's nothing, it's just like there's too much.
what's very interesting, and I agree, but what's very interesting about it is at the same time, I'm still having a hard time envisioning how this slots into standard and like the
Same.
degree of shaking up standard it's going to do. But it's doing a great job reaching back to older formats, which I think is like a really big triumph. I think that's a really important thing that sets need to be able to do. They need to hit these ostensibly more popular formats at this point, things like Commander, things like Modern, while still keeping standard balanced. And that's where things like Throne of Eldraine failed. They just completely, threw standard off kilter. I don't see anything like that here, but I do see cards that can make impact in these other formats. So that's really nice to see.
I don't know, man. Throne of Eldraine did a pretty good job of impacting older formats too.
No, I agree. It destroyed its main format. Although who knows if standard is even the main format anymore? So maybe all those metrics are out the window.
When that set came out, it was.
Yes, for sure.
So I guess it did its job. It did make it so that was not the case anymore. But standard's weird because we just had some recent bannings and I hadn't been paying too much attention to the format. I looked at like some of the decks that people were playing and I have a pretty good idea of like what seems to be doing well. But as far as like actually getting into the nitty gritty and playing myself, I have not.
Do you have like a very high level takeaway from what you're seeing in standard? Because I've been following results too, like you, not playing, but just keeping track of everything. And I think it's somewhat interesting. I think it's better than I expected it to be based on results, quite frankly. But I had very low hopes. I didn't think we actually solved much of the problems that were present. And I still kind of feel that way, but it's playing a little bit better than I thought it would, basically.
A lot of mid-range.
Yes, which I'm okay with, though.
Yes.
I think that's fine for standard.
Yes, same. I do not mean to make that sound disparaging in any way. And a decent amount of control and a decent amount of aggro. So, like, archetypes are represented, which is awesome. It seems like there is a lot of variety in how you build your decks, at least for the mid-range and control side of things. Aggro decks, maybe not so much, but that's kind of to be expected when it's like mono green, mono white. All that stuff seems fine to me. And then in the context of adding this set into the mix, I think that this set has some really good tools to potentially shake things up and give people different incentives, basically, which is nice because it's hard to get away from some of the stuff that's worth doing in standard.
Yeah, that's the thing I keep coming back to is I am hopeful. There's a lot of cool things I want to build around in this set. I can't bring myself to do it though because I don't believe in them yet. And maybe once I have the full file in front of me and I can see all the cards again, I will be able to put some more things together. But some of the cards we'll talk about today, I'll highlight. Oh, I think this would be awesome to build around, but I also don't believe in it whatsoever. And I'm hoping I get to the point where I do believe in some of these ideas.
All right, so real quick, what is your plan when this set comes out?
I've been thinking about that. I am really torn because honestly, like I was mostly ready to be done with Arena. Like I was really upset about the way Alchemy has been handled and the way Historic. And I just like kind of reached a breaking point. And I'm like, maybe I don't want to do this anymore. Maybe Arena is not the space for me. And I go back to Magic Online or, I don't even play standard. I just observe and comment in that fashion, which I'm comfortable doing. I will always probably miss a little something that way, but I can get enough information to do a very effective job, I think, in those contexts. Now, like we get closer and closer and I'm sort of getting that itch a little bit. Like I want to build some of these decks. I want to try them. I don't know what to do. I really don't know.
The problem is a set like this really exacerbates the already existing issues that Arena has. Because
I agree with you.
We're looking at a set with power level that seems relatively flat, a lot of appealing cards, a decent amount of them too at higher rarities, not like an overwhelming amount of rares and mythics or anything, but it would definitely take a lot to flesh out the ideas that I want to work with. And then there's just no recouping that.
Yep. It's another $200 in. Like that's basically what I do it's what I've done every single set. And the problem is once I stop, you can't catch up. I'm not going back at that point. There's almost no chance. So when I make the decision to be done with buying whatever set comes out, that's probably it for me in Arena. I don't know. I mean, like maybe there's enough sentiment building along the same lines where Magic Online can be a little bit more active this standard season early on. Maybe we can help drive that a little bit and encourage people to think about going back to Magic Online. I just don't know what to do anymore. It's like I've spent the last week playing a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh. I'm really enjoying it. My whole conception of Yu-Gi-Oh has changed, where it was something that I just saw as kind of like, Magic's younger sibling, basically, and never really gave it due respect. And
Nothing wrong with being the younger sibling, man.
I don't know about that, but I will tell you that my opinion has changed, and I think it's a good game. I think it's got flaws. It does some silly things, but some of its high points are really, really high. But specifically, the client is so generous. Like I have 5 top tier decks, and I spent like $100, and I don't know when I have to spend money again because I'm getting a steady drip of like new cards. And why would I consent to $200 every set till the end of time? And there's extra sets on top of the 4 sets already. And if you think this is going to get better, I mean, this is conjecture and maybe going a little bit further than I need to, but like 2 new people just got put in charge of Wizards. They come from a mobile gaming background.
Yep.
And mobile gaming, not in like the really awesome apps that move the entire genre forward. Mobile gaming in the, let's figure out how to get some whales and fleece them for a lot of money type space. And
strip mining.
Yeah. So who knows like where the decision to place those people at the head of the company came from. My guess, complete conjecture, I don't want to like make it sound like I know how this whole process works, but my guess is probably the CEO of Wizards is directed by Hasbro. Almost entirely. I doubt very little of it is internal decision making. And if Hasbro says this is going to be the person who's in charge of Wizards and they come from this background, what do you think Hasbro's goals for the Wizards of the Coast ecosystem is?
Well, I mean, Chris Cox is now the CEO of Hasbro, right? And he was the president of Wizards before. So.
Sure. Came from a console gaming background.
Sure. But like
previously,
he steered the ship in the last 5 years or whatever. So if he's appointing his replacement or, some amount of like higher ups at Hasbro, that would not surprise me. And then to like reward Chris Cox for the way he handled things also probably means that they want to have someone who's like going to do the same stuff as he did.
Right. That would be my guess too.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like going further down the mobile gaming gotcha type approach to things. So I don't think Arena is going to get better. I think it'll probably get worse before it gets better in terms of the way it kind of gouges its most dedicated player base. And at some point you got to draw lines, Gerald. You can't keep pushing them back over and over. At some point you just have to be like, this is not working for me anymore. And I think we're starting to see a trend where a bunch of people are saying that, there's been talk on Twitter over like Twitch viewership metrics. And quite frankly, most of the top streamers on Twitch for Magic, they're back on Magic Online at this point. They're not playing Arena. And there's exceptions, but you look at Caleb and Aspiring Spike, and I know Mengucci and so many other folks who are prominent, a Canister. I mean, many folks who are prominent in the streaming space are back on Magic Online.
Many of those folks did not spend that much time on Arena anyway.
Fair. That's
unless there's like, cubes or whatever. But
yeah. No, very, very true.
They came from Magic Online backgrounds and have mostly stayed there.
But it's funny to see like they're the ones who are still succeeding, right? Like the space hasn't been completely taken over, and the numbers continue to trend down regardless. So I don't know. I don't know what the future holds for Arena. I do know I'm somewhat sick of it, and I have to make a decision when the set drops, and I don't know what's going to be yet. I can't answer that question.
A thing that popped into my head when we were talking about the Chris Cox stuff, this happened like years ago, but I just remember hearing a thing where one of the higher ups at Wizards finally figured out how much money Clash Royale made at the time. This is like, again, 5 years ago or something. And then that just became like the driving narrative of just like, how can we do this? Just like make as much money as they do. And at the time, it didn't really bother me because I was like, what are they going to do? It's just like Magic is like this paper game and blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of forgot about it until like right now. And it's just like, oh, shit, they actually did it.
Yeah. Now you see what they're going to do.
Yeah.
They did a great job of it, too, quite frankly. I mean, it's not what I wanted, but you have to applaud just sheer. You don't have to applaud it. You
have to hand it to them, Brian.
Let's not applaud. Let's acknowledge the sheer raw capitalism that they have driven Magic forward with and the dollars they have made. I'm not gonna hand it to them. I'm going to acknowledge it. They did it.
I'm not going to hand it to them.
Okay.
That's all right. We'll talk about their cards, though. Their cards are cool.
Yep. Agreed.
Shout out to the R&D department for...
Love them. My favorite department at Wizards of the Coast.
Is it my favorite? It's probably my favorite.
I've heard good things about the cafeteria staff, but I haven't been there myself, so I can't comment on them.
I haven't been there in 8 years.
They're probably a little outdated.
It was like grilled cheese Wednesday.
Love it. Love grilled cheeses.
Yeah. So
were they good grilled cheeses?
Dude, yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
They were hella good. They made like a cinnamon apple cider also that was just bomb.
Okay.
So, dude, the cafeteria was nice. And
yeah, that's pretty flashy for an employee cafeteria. Like, that's above and beyond, I would say.
Yeah, it was not bad. It was not bad at all. Whenever I was like, short on time to get lunch because I had to finish something or like a meeting ran over, so I was not upset. I was just like, I'll just go down to the cafeteria, no big.
So I've had two experiences with employee cafeterias, basically. One was when I worked in a casino in Las Vegas. That basically felt like getting the casino buffet all the time, which I didn't mind. I mean, there was always a lot of options and I always found something to eat. The other one was at my law firm in New York City, where it was kind of incredible, the stuff you got, and it was really cheap too, for some reason. Like these people needed it to be really cheap, but it was just super affordable and made fresh all the time and really talented cooks working. So I am very pro employee cafeteria. If you can find a place, a work environment where you get one of those, I say go for it.
Agreed. Because my other option was like going to Jimmy John's. So
not good.
Yeah.
Don't love the Jimmy John's.
Julie's Cafe, A++. All right. Wizarding Squares.
Yes. Finally.
Mix of cards from both Brian and I, just mostly to generate discussion. This is not our top 10 or top 20 or anything like that.
Next week, I'm assuming we'll be ready for that.
Yeah, probably. So we're just going to talk about some stuff that looks interesting and in no particular order because we are lazy.
Yes.
First up, Mind Link Mech. 2U, artifact vehicle 4/3, flying. Whenever this becomes crewed for the first time each turn until end of turn, this becomes a copy of target non-legendary creature that crewed it this turn, except it's 4/3. It's a vehicle artifact in addition to its other types, and it has flying, and it has crew 1.
I think vehicles as a type often play far better than we expect them to. Now, I'm also thinking of some exceptions to that. Cosmina comes to mind. It was just a complete fail, never did anything.
That vehicle is good.
It seemed like it. Did not see any play. Context is everything, of course, but there have been vehicle misses before. This one interests me for a few reasons. First, that crew cost extremely low, inherently evasive. So the flying is tacked on. That's been important in the past for very successful vehicles. And it's very easy to see units that benefit from crewing this Mind Link mech. There is, like, for instance, 1/1 double striking equipment-y thing in red. Forget what it's called, but it's not the Lizard Blades. Is it the Lizard Blades? Maybe it is.
Yeah.
It is the Lizard Blades. Okay. So Lizard Blades is a 1 colorless red artifact creature, equipment lizard, double strike. Equipped creature has double strike, and it reconfigures for 2. But that could hop right into this Mind Link mech, and you'll have a 4/3 flying double striker on curve. That's great on defense, great on offense. I think there's probably things you can do, with on-hit triggers. There's obviously all the ninjutsu stuff here, so getting them to this Mind Link mech and getting their triggers is very important since most of them don't have any natural evasion. They kind of just do their thing, and that you're supposed to get them through with the ninjutsu ability, not necessarily their own text. So I think this could have some applications, and also it's very clear that vehicles is being set up for the first time. I think it's an archetype. Like, there's support for the vehicle tribe, if you will, and I think this could be a key part of that.
There was DePaula and RW 3/1, There was like some vehicle type stuff. Like those cards eventually got cut for just like raw rate stuff.
Yeah, something about that feels different. Like this seems more about the vehicles and that seemed more about the pilots to me.
That's fair.
Maybe that's a little off, but
no, that makes sense to me. I get that. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like there's definitely a lot of vehicles matter stuff. Mind Lake Mech is definitely like a very like solid looking build around card too. So
Mhm.
I'm right there with you. I do feel like the vehicles probably matter more than the pilots. And I mean, the pilots have text, right? It's like you're trying for the mech. Obviously, you want something with appealing text on it to copy. And I mean, if not, you have a Crew 143 flyer, right?
Yep.
So it's still not that bad. But
No, not at all.
the pilots are just like, I crew bigger vehicles than my power indicates or whatever. It's not super flashy, whereas the vehicles look like the flashy cards.
Yep. Yeah, I'm excited to see what we do when we get all the pieces to these vehicles. And this isn't the only vehicle I want to talk about today. So there's other interesting ones out there as well.
Reinforced Ronin. R22, artifact creature human samurai, haste. At the beginning of your end step, return this to your hand. Channel 1R, discard this, draw a card. Do you think this card is actually good?
I do. And after I say that, I'm also going to admit I'm very bad at rating these type of cards. It's just not my wheelhouse. I have a hard time with sort of the aggro math, I guess. But obviously, extremely explosive on turn one. It will cost you mana throughout the game if you're going to keep going back to it. You have to go back to it.
Hold on. Define explosive.
Well, 2/2. I mean, that's the best aggro creature ever. 1 mana, 2/2 haste, right?
Yeah, but then it sets you back.
And then it sets you back.
So it's not explosive. Like, yeah, you're getting like a good rate on that turn, but
Well, so here's the thing. Depending on how games play out, so much of Goblin Guide's impact was like in that first attack. And then second attack, it's about the removal spell or it's getting brick walled very quickly. And if you go like Goblin Guide, you're in a very good situation. You can still kind of go Goblin Guide here. You eat your first 2 turns, accomplish nothing. And basically, you've just played 2 lava spikes. Now, in older formats, I'd be like, that's not worth it. I'm not interested. In something like Standard, that's a really nice start. And you haven't actually committed any material at that point. Like, you have the threat of doing this again, or you turn this into another card, which I think is where the draw really comes from for me. And if I have a problem with not analyzing these type of cards well, another thing I do somewhat poorly is when you give me value, when you give me an out for a card to not become invalidated,
yeah.
I get way more excited about it. And this does that trick. So I am willing to be tricked by this card, I guess, when I say I think it's very good. If I get it wrong, I won't be completely shocked, but to me, it's got all the pieces I need in a card like this.
I don't think this card is necessarily bad, but in the instances you're describing where it's like, oh yeah, I just spend all my mana to like shock them maybe and hope that they don't play like a werewolf pack leader or whatever. It's just like I'm envisioning how the games are playing out, and it doesn't seem like it is great to like lead with this thing. I think that this is a fine thing to like add to the board on turn 3 and like kill a blocker and attack with some of the creatures that you already have. I think that this is like a reasonable way to get around sweepers and stuff. I don't think this is like a 4 of, it's like maybe a 2 of or something.
Really love it in the context where you're playing against just pure control. Like it absolutely shines there, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's its role. Maybe it's a sideboard card for those matchups, and you just bring in 4 of these things, and then you have a really, really strong plan against them that lines up very well against any kind of sorcery speed removal they're leaning on. And obviously, sorcery speed removal is a big part of Control's plan these days. The instant stuff doesn't happen as often. That'll depend on the format. The tools are there if you want them, so that'll all have to be shook out. But I don't know. I would be surprised if this card saw no play, and I would be less surprised if it was an important card in the format. That's where I fall on it.
Yeah, that's fair. It's just like the red decks, like, yeah, they do just like lava spike you or whatever, but like part of what makes them so good is that they are mana efficient in most instances. Mm-hmm. And they're able to like get under their opponents and kill them before they're able to deploy their more powerful cards. And this card definitely does not help you do that by itself, which is why I don't necessarily like it or like the idea of like loading up on a bunch of them. And then it's like, oh, well, my opponent has like, 2/3/3s to block. You're like spending your mana cycling this thing away when you're then just getting pounded, So it's just
falling further behind.
It's like it has appealing text, but it's also just like so mana intensive that it seems hard for me to believe. But like there are also like other good red 1-drops in the set. So if this is a thing that you play on top of those cards and not as a thing that you're trying to like jam on turn 1, then I'm more about it.
I guess there's also a world too where like You talk about what makes red decks good, and it's the mana efficiency. I agree with you, but also red decks aren't very good right now. So maybe they need to reclaim a new identity, and maybe this needs support of a different nature than what we've seen for red. I mean, the red decks of the past few standards have been like reach card advantage focus, right?
Yes, but they're still about playing to the board and being able to like morph into a control deck and stuff. And like this just doesn't do any of that.
Right. But that's my point. Like maybe that's what new red decks have to do to succeed in this very different environment than we've seen previously.
Sure. I think of like the red deck I was playing in Alchemy, like that sort of thing. Like I definitely like that sort of red deck where like all of your cards are hard hitting. You have a bunch of burn spells. You have like bigger cards in your sideboard, some card advantage stuff. I like those. I think that type of deck would be successful. We're just missing the cards in actual standard, and the stuff in this set is really focused towards like pure aggression.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that we'll be really shifting our red focus all that much.
I could buy that.
But again, we still have almost 100 cards left to go, so anything could happen.
Very true.
Blade of the Oni, 1B, artifact creature, equipment demon, 3/1, menace. Equipped creature has base power and toughness 5/5, has menace, and is a black demon in addition to its other colors and types, and you can reconfigure for 2 BB. So a 2 mana 3/1 menace, pretty solid, and then later on, it can potentially turn something else into a 5/5.
I feel like this card is going to disappoint in standard.
Likely.
These cards almost always do, it feels like. But it's really interesting how Stoneforge Mystic is diversifying its suite so dramatically, where I think like you have to go back and look at what those decks are all capable of. And can they play like more aggressive game plans? Can they just load up on these equipment creatures and like, I don't know, look to get more value out of Stoneforge via blinking or recycling? All these paths are very interesting to me. Feels a little underpowered for Modern. I wish there was like a little bit safer format for Stoneforge Mystic, but if Stoneforge Mystic was there, it wouldn't be a very safe format. So that doesn't really work out. I'm curious, though. I'm curious what you can do with Stoneforge in these scenarios.
Vial, once all of your equipment are also creatures, is pretty cool because you get to spend your mana equipping.
Yep.
That gives you a bunch of artifacts. That means you can play Urza Saga. So
got the wheels turning.
I think that's a solid like tier 3 in Modern, but it's something. The interesting thing that I thought of when you brought up Stoneforge Mystic is I was building like some of the Grief Ephemerate decks initially early on. And it was like, man, all like trying to get the right amount of like black and white cards is super tough. And you always see these decks just playing like some really miserable cards, honestly. And sometimes you have a Stoneforge package, and I was looking for a black equipment that I could Stoneforge for. And I think the only one I found was just like really, really unplayable.
Yeah, I can envision one in my head, and I don't know the name of it, so that means it must not be very good.
This one is not incredible or anything, but this is a pretty reasonable card that you could like Stoneforge for and then grief away pretty easily. So
yeah, that works for me.
Slight boost there. So perhaps destined to see Modern play.
Maybe, and I like the ability to like sink all that mana into it and make a 5/5 with Menace. That sizing can be awkward. That's sort of changed with things like Unholy Heat. It used to be like Batterskull sizing would give some decks problems in the past.
Yeah.
When you got to 4/4, and this being 5/5 is even bigger, obviously. I think that issue has mostly been taken care of at this stage in the format, but I don't know. There's obviously a bunch of options to consider in this equipment creature space, so I want to check all of them with Stoneforge.
2 mana 3/1 with Menace is not terrible. Like the random 3/1s with no combat ability are generally pretty bad, but like this actually does get in for a decent amount of damage,
Yeah, or possibly trade for 2 creatures. It's
maybe
happen.
I could see that. I guess. So this I'm not gonna write this one off. It really depends on what the rest of the black aggro type of stuff looks like, and 2 mana 3 power that could like potentially crew some important stuff. So
yep,
maybe
very
not
true.
the worst thing.
Yep.
Shigeki, Jukai Visionary, 1G, 1/3, legendary enchantment creature snake druid. 1G, tap, return this to its owner's hand, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a land among them onto the battlefield tapped. Put the rest into your graveyard. Channel XXGG, discard this, return X target non-legendary cards from your graveyard to your hand. This card is weird.
This is going right next to the reality chip in cards I just absolutely love and are exactly good enough to make me waste a bunch of wild cards and never win with them. Like this payout seems so impactful for your 2 mana creature. It's just glacial,
Yes.
absolutely glacial. And in some environments that's fine. You can get away with that. In what Standard does look like recently, I'm less convinced you can get away with this. Like this is the mid-rangiest tool possible, basically, and is so powerful when it's doing its thing. And again, you're putting that late game value on a card. Like I'm doing my thing early and ramping. In the late game, I turn this into the best spells in my graveyard, and that's really appealing to me. I just think it's a huge mana investment and probably not going to work out. I would love to try it though.
I think this could be fine as like a 1 or 2 of in most of the green decks because, I don't know, say you're playing like Jasper Sentinel Magda or something in Standard. And then it's like, do you play Prosperous Innkeeper? Like past that, you don't really have a lot of good options. So it's like a couple copies of this might be fine. And then if you have excess mana, all right, yeah, you go digging for a land and maybe you have some other ways to incidentally ramp too. I mean, like Jaspera, Magda, if left unchecked, can end up with a bunch of treasures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I could see the channel just like being game winning if the game has played out a certain way. Like there are enough games that like come to a stalemate. You just like don't have anything really relevant in your graveyard. But like if the game has actually been going on and you have like 8 cards in your graveyard, obviously you're gonna have like a lot of good targets for this thing, which is cool. And then I don't know if there's some sort of like combo deck that could use this, or if there is just like a bigger ramp deck that could, but it's like, I see potential. It's just like not really what any of these formats are about. So it probably takes some other help.
In a world where decks were still capable of running out of things to do, this would be one of the most incredible cards you could ever put together. Decks don't do that anymore. You just never run out of stuff to do. There's always something to do with your mana. There's always card advantage to be gained. Every creature has a spell attached to it, and you almost never run out of cards in hand, especially in like slower mid-range decks, the type of which would be interested in something like Shigeki. So you go back 10 years, this card's mind-blowing. You come to now, I am less convinced it's going to do anything, but I really want it to. Like I want it really badly.
Similar to the R2-2, it's just like, this is just so much mana to like keep doing its thing. It's just ridiculous.
Yes, it is. Reminds you of like the least efficient Thawing Glaciers ever.
Yes.
And that card was already kind of like on the slow side.
Do not slander Thawing Glaciers, man.
I know. Look, I come from the Thawing Glaciers era as well. I have a lot of affection for that card, but it took its time. It was not in any rush.
True. Reckoner Bankbuster. 2 mana for a 4/4 artifact vehicle. This enters the battlefield with 3 charge counters on it. You can pay 2, tap, remove a charge counter from this, draw a card. Then, if there are no charge counters on this, create a treasure token and a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this creature accrues vehicles as though its power were 2 greater, and it has crew 3.
This is here for you. I saw this and I was like, this is a Gerald card.
For me?
Well, for you. This is Treasure Map. Are you kidding me? This is your jam.
This is not Treasure Map. This is my end up seeing more play than Treasure Map, but it's not Treasure Map.
Treasure Map, Maze Mine Tome. It's exactly in those same veins, except with a weirdo payout in the end, as opposed to Flash of Mana or whatever it was we would get from those cards. But the slow artifact that gets you both battlefield presence and payout in terms of card advantage, that's not right up your alley.
Dude, I just want to accrue this thing and attack them.
Okay, well, you can do that too. You can do whatever you want. All these options are available, and high crew cost, I'll say, but there's a lot of ways to cheat on those in this set, and you get to crew it itself if you go through the steps and take all 3 cards off of it. And you ever get full payout from this card, you've gotten a lot of material from your 2-drop.
Yes. So. I think it is interesting that you can play this as like a Maze Mine Tome type of thing that can eventually kill them.
Yeah.
Just because it works with itself, basically. But I don't know, man. Maze Mine Tome, you almost always like weaved in a free scry in there that helped you hit your land drops, the gaining 4 life, like that mattered. Obviously, this can like kind of help stabilize you in a weird way too. But I would say that this is definitely no Treasure Map. I could see playing it as like a Maze Mine Tome. Certainly, I don't know if you're playing like Control Mirrors or whatever, like maybe this is solid.
Yeah.
But I just want this in my beatdown deck, and then when they stabilize, you have something to do with your mana.
Yeah. That's a cool thing to do with it for sure. Very much part of that vehicles deck we mentioned earlier, I think. And another one of those cards where I'm like, I just hope I can do something with this. I think slow but powerful is kind of the tagline for this set. Like you can get really good payouts from these cards. It just takes time. And I don't know if the time is there in present standard.
Which means we should be looking for something that kind of breaks that paradigm.
I agree with you. That's how you get ahead is you go one way where everyone else is going the other way.
Next up is Reality Heist. 5 UU instant. Effectively has affinity for artifacts. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 artifact cards from among them, put them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order.
I remember when I was working on the set, this was one of the cards that frightened me. I think it's changed in this come to print version.
Did it not find only artifacts before?
I think it was a mana more, or a mana less, I'm sorry.
Okay.
If I recall correctly.
Okay.
But same function.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was frightening to me. This is still a little frightening to me. I mean, I don't have something to do with this right now, but if you go back 5 years ago and you got to put this card in like KCI, seems incredible there.
Yes.
And I think like in general, the Mox Opal decks that existed in the modern format would have loved this card. Now that has changed. We don't have Mox Opal anymore, and that means this card has gotten, I would say, dramatically worse. That doesn't mean there's no way to do this type of stuff. And I'm always like looking at weird like Underworld Breach stuff in the historic space, and that is often built on things like Mox Amber. So there's close proximities to Reality Heist, I would say, like, or excuse me, they're like KCI style decks that exist out there, but none of them are going to leverage this card quite as well. So my instinct is like, this is mostly fine. You have to have a very specific deck to benefit from this. But if that deck comes along, Reality Heist could be a super powerful card in it.
The fact that it only finds artifacts was the biggest issue for me. At first, like, you read this card and it's like, oh yeah, I could probably find a deck for this. It seems pretty powerful, pretty interesting. And then I actually went and tried to build some modern decks and mostly came up short.
I'm not surprised. I think it requires a very specific set of circumstances. And if those circumstances are met, Reality Heist is going to be in trouble. I think like this dooms any talk of ever taking the artifact lands off the modern ban list. I would not do that anymore. I think that would be a huge mistake given that this card exists. Although I don't think that was ever happening anyway, so that's not really a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I like Thought Monitor is just a card where it's like, well, I'd probably not want to unban Seat of the Side Knot.
Agreed. I agree entirely, and this only furthers that. So I don't expect immediate things from this card. It'll be something, though, that I will keep in my memory banks for a long time.
There are some decks that I came up with. One is Paradox Engine because, like KCI, a lot of its setup and its payoff are artifacts. Yep. And that's kind of the key with this because you were talking about Underworld Breach, and it's like, well, this card can never find Breach, so it kind of defeats the purpose. There are also some like Karn-based artifact prison decks, which maybe this is okay in. It seems kind of weird because, it doesn't find Karn, and you're generally an ensnaring bridge deck, but this is like a draw to an ensnaring bridge deck, which can be fine if it's like the last card you cast, because then you just like play out your stuff immediately. But if you're like putting more cards into your hand in your ensnaring bridge deck, it's weird.
Lantern Control is another spot where this would have shined too. So,
well, yeah, Lantern was kind of on my list too, where it's like, yeah, all the things are relevant artifacts, and at least for that, it's like you play bridge, and then the next turn you're pretty good at just like dumping your entire hand. And it's possible that this, maybe is not a 4 of or whatever, but like as a 2 of in that deck. Yep. Or maybe it's like a sideboard plan against Kolagon's Command type of things or whatever.
Yeah, that's cool.
So there was some stuff where I was like, maybe, I was trying to do Thopter Sword things, but it doesn't get the third piece unless your third piece is like Time Sieve, because it's never going to find Urza or like the thing that makes you infinite mana.
Right.
And then I was like, is there something you can do with Academy Manufacturer? And then I was just like, I'm tired. I'm done.
That's enough. I've done enough Reality Heisting. I'll let someone else figure it out.
Yep. So I did, I think my due diligence. We'll see. But I tried, kind of failed. I ultimately feel like this is a role player that is almost certainly fine within the context of the format now. Could potentially be busted if, like you said, we had something like KCI.
Yep.
Cool. Oh, my favorite card. Otawara, Soaring City. Is a legendary land. It taps for you, and you can channel for 3U, discard this, return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control.
Your favorite card, go off.
I tweeted about it already, man. I'm sorry. Did I kill the content for this week?
You kind of did, but that's okay. Some people don't follow you on Twitter, probably, and still listen to the show.
Tweet occasionally, you know?
I have to tweet constantly. I understand.
Well,
I know where it's coming from.
You don't, but I'm just hemorrhaging flowers, man, because I don't ever say anything. So
well, I'm accumulating them. So who's winning at Twitter now, Gerald?
Yeah, clearly you, man.
No, it's clearly you, actually.
So I get these like thoughts, these like snarky thoughts or whatever. Sometimes like mean things. I don't know. I generally send them to Brian on Discord, and this time I sent it to Brian and was like, no, I'm going to tweet this. You know, even though it's like kind of weird, but like my premise was that this is my favorite card so far because it means that people might play fewer copies of Castle Vantress in their modern decks, and I think that Castle Vantress is already pretty mediocre because it's such a huge investment, but it also just like mana screws you if you don't build your deck correctly. And there are so many decks I see where it's like 20 lands, 11 islands, and 3 Castle Vantresses, and it's like, how does this not ever just like ETB tapped and like completely mess you up? You know, like if people just never had that experience, I don't understand. So at least if you're playing this instead of Vantress, ETB is untapped.
Agreed.
That's it? That's all you got for me?
Yeah, that's it. What, do you think I was going to troll you or do something juvenile and try and argue in favor of Castle Vantress?
No, I mean, you have no good argument. You know that you would lose that debate.
I do know that. I take up enough losing positions where I can let a Castle Vantress slander go by.
So yeah, like me tweeting that was like kind of weird because it's like we only really talk about it on the podcast, and not everyone who like follows my Twitter listens to the podcast. So it's like I say this thing that's kind of like weird, and they're going to be like, "What the hell does that mean?" You know. So I don't know. Whatever. I tweeted it got like medium traction.
I think that the miscommunication aspect is part of the fun of Twitter.
Okay, so you are just sowing chaos.
To some extent, yes. I often like to sow chaos a bit, blur the lines, if you will. Something I find very interesting. Do I mean this? Do I not mean this? It's always a mystery.
So I don't like that, man. I want to like present myself, and I want to always be myself. I don't want people to have a reason to like think ill of me or think that I'm something I'm not.
See, I see it as a form of absurdist humor, which I know you hate. You have no love whatsoever for absurdist humor, whereas I am a large fan of it. So I think there's something to be said for the like. Do you know? No, there's no chance you know who Tim Heidecker is.
No,
like a comedian, basically, but plays it straight always. So you're not quite sure if he's ever genuine. And I think he's one of the more brilliant people out there. He did like a parody of a Joe Rogan show type podcast and just nails it. I think you would appreciate this bit of humor. I'm going to send you that tweet. But yeah, that's kind of my MO on the Twitter space.
Yeah. So the problem is that if people don't know that I'm coming from that, then it's very confusing, right?
Yes.
And I also think that like people don't necessarily know that you're coming from that in a lot of instances.
I know.
So I don't know, man.
Really confusing.
I don't necessarily care about putting like my best self forward, but I want to put myself forward, you know?
Can that type of like deconstructionist dual nature, can that be your real self? Can it be someone's real self? Maybe not your real self.
I mean, it can be part of you, but then I think you are preventing people from actually seeing the real you. If like that is your go-to every time, is to, you know, give them like a 60-40 and they have to decide like what you actually mean or care about, right? Mm-hmm. It's like they might know what kind of humor you appreciate and like, oh, you're like a fun, jovial person or whatever, but they don't know you. And granted, this is coming from someone who feels like very few people in the world actually know me, right? But like, I would like that number to go up, and that requires people paying a lot of attention and caring, which I don't think that people necessarily do. But it's so much murkier when you start going down that path just for like some jokes, you know?
It's interesting. See, I think to me, maybe this is strayed a little far from the podcast. I think existence is inherently absurd. And so I lean on that a bunch to kind of make sense of it,
So
if that is clear.
I agree with that. I mean, that's not really my coping mechanism or whatever.
Right.
But I definitely agree with you that just like somewhat like we're here, like we're talking through our computers. Like, how did we even get here? What is the point? You know, nothing makes sense, right?
Right.
So I'm right there with you. Just, you know, if I ever sat down and like thought about it, I would be like very, very confused.
Yeah, you just don't tweet through it like I do. That's all.
Yeah.
that's the different point.
Yeah, instead, it's like most of the stuff that I tweet through or tweet about are just, you know, things that are stemming from decisions that humans made,
Yeah.
you know? And like that is not super absurdist because humans are humans, right? It's like they're very complex, but also like pretty simplistic, where it's like so many of the decisions that get made can be distilled into money, right?
Of course. Yeah.
So it's just like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there's like a lot of stuff I don't know and like a lot of factors that went into this, but ultimately, like, you're greedy, you know, and like that's just what it comes down to. And it's pretty simple once you distill that down for like human nature compared to like the existence of the universe or whatever.
That's true. It definitely a good framework for approaching things, and one that hits more often than it misses, I would say.
Yes. And occasionally you're surprised, right? It's like, oh, you did this thing because I thought X, Y, and Z. And it was like, oh, I just didn't even think about this other thing. And now, like, that makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, Occam's razor does apply in terms of humans. So it's easier to grasp for me.
It's funny how both similar and different we are in our approaches to things. Like, I think at our core, we're very similar people, but the way we go about things is just night and day.
Yeah, I'm sure we have like a lot of the same feelings, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
And certainly this similar views on things and everything, but you're just like out here shit posting, and I'm just like, I should just not tweet.
You're like under the blankets, just huddled up in a ball, being like, I just want to be left alone.
Yeah, I'm just going to catch some Pokemon and, you know, go to sleep. Hopefully when I wake up, things will be fine.
I get that approach too.
Lion Sash.
Yeah, Lion Sash.
1 dub, 1/1, artifact creature, equipment cat, dub. Exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a permanent card, put a +1/+1 counter on this. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on this. Reconfigure 2. So kind of a scavenging ooze. Stoneforge Mysticable. Very good. I don't know.
I just love this card. I think it does so much cool stuff, and great to see white getting an effect like this. I am sure this matters in older formats. Now that you talked about like Ether Vial doing this stuff very effectively, I'm really interested in how good this deck could actually be, because there is something to that idea of Stoneforge Mystic being both put into play by Ether Vial and getting things that can be further Ether Vialed. And if it's stuff like Lion Sash, which, you know, addresses a pretty fundamental problem in the modern format, you often have to control your opponent's graveyard to find success. I believe in this card. I think this is an important card going forward. I don't know that it has, like, again, an immediate home in Standard, where it's sort of vulnerable and graveyards are less a thing and it can't be tutored up by Stoneforge Mystic, but surely like the rate is still good enough for it to matter in that space as well. I have to assume. I don't think it's like a format all-star, but there should be occasional Lion Sash play. If not now, that at some point when maybe graveyards do become more important.
Think Historic is probably the spot for it.
Okay, yeah.
Or like Pioneer too.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe not Standard, because these things don't matter as much, and like there's not really a mid-rangey white deck at the moment. It is mostly just about Jackal Pups and killing people, and this sort of effect is pretty solid there, but it's not like the best thing you could be doing.
Right. Very mana intensive, right? You got to kind of build it up over time, and if you want to move it around, that takes mana, and a little slow on the uptake. So another card very much the same way, but despite being slow, this one I think does have a very important home in the older formats because of what it targets, even if it does it slowly.
It's not super slow because you get to weave the mana in whenever you have an excess.
Sure.
You know, and then it's like, well, I could, you know, spend a couple of mana, make this a 3/3, and then now it's pretty reasonable in combat. Or you also have the threat of activating, which means that they can't block it, right? So
yeah, what do you make of the difference between like Scavenging Ooze only grows off of creatures, this grows off of any permanent? Do you think that's significant in terms of how big Lion Sash is going to get?
it depends on the format, right? Because there's like fetch lands and stuff. So this thing could just get enormous. But for the most part, I think that they'll be pretty similar. I One of the aspects about scavenging ooze I liked a lot is like the incidental like 3 life that you gain that helps you stabilize that this doesn't have. So it's not like a pure mid-range card where it's like, oh, you're happy to include this basically no matter what, just because it
Yep.
kind of has like all these different things. So I think this is better as like a grizzly bear, even though it's a 1/1, but like, you know what I mean? 2-drop that grows and like threatens to do stuff. And eventually maybe you put this on a flyer or something, but
Right.
maybe a little bit better in decks that are creature decks versus like controller mid-range.
Sure. I see that.
But yeah, definitely very good. White certainly needs more stuff like this. So I'm super, super happy to see it.
Same. Probably my favorite card in the set thus far.
Mine's Otawara, Soaring City,
Okay.
because Castle Mantras sucks.
Yep. I remember.
Hotshot Mechanic, dub, 2/1, artifact creature, Fox Pilot. This crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. I kind of hate this mechanic, but like this card is pretty strong.
It's weird. It's something to keep track of where the numbers don't actually line up with what they do, which I'm never a huge fan of. But there's still got to be some use for Savannah Lions with upside. I think. I am hopeful that this card can matter. I hope we can make a really good deck out of this. A very sort of pre-built thing, and it feels like the pre-built things haven't been good in a long time. They just never quite come together. I would be fine if this one does. I think it's unique enough that having a very good vehicle deck that like starts on curve with Hotshot Mechanic and it's pretty aggressive, that appeals to me. So I hope we get there.
Do you remember Food?
I do remember Food.
That was
That
was the thing that was pretty good.
Yeah, but I don't think the food deck was about food though. Do you know what I mean?
No, but it was pre-built, basically.
Well, only because all the cards were broken.
Yes.
It wasn't pre-built around like a synergy, which is how I think pre-builts are supposed to work. It was just, here are the most ridiculous cards you could ever imagine. Also, they all reference food. So go to town.
Yeah, Trail of Crumbs is like the only one where it's like, okay, I guess technically you need things that like make food to make this good. But it's like Cat Oven didn't really have to do with food.
No.
Oko didn't really have to do with food.
Yeah, they were just the best cards.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think that this card, certainly like Savannah Lions, is already solid, right? And then it has this ability where, I don't know, we just need to see if there's like a good Crew 3, Crew 4 vehicle, something that matters that you would actually want to play in your deck if you don't happen to have this. And then maybe this is just kind of like easy mode for some stuff.
Yep.
So
exactly.
I believe in these cards so far.
I hope so. I hope you're right.
Moon Snare Prototype. You, artifact, tap, and tap an untapped artifact or creature you control, add colorless, channel for you, discard this. The owner of target non-land permanent puts it on the top or bottom of their library.
Nobody seems particularly excited about this card. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of buzz around it. I think this is the best card in this set for Modern by far. I think it's incredible in that format, doing like Urza type stuff. Urza has not been a thing for quite some time. I think Moon Snare Prototype in and of itself could make it a thing again. Being able to leverage all the weird rocks that are around, things like Mishra's Bauble. Now, granted, you don't get to catch in your Mishra's Bauble right away if you're going to go ahead and tap it to leverage Moon Snare Prototype.
Well, if you have Thought Monitor, you might want to keep it around anyway.
Very true. Very true. And this obviously contributes to your Thought Monitor counts and ramps you twice, and then is a removal spell. Like, that seems like a lot for a Spring Leaf Drum analog. And granted, Spring Leaf Drum's job in a lot of instances was to fix your mana. But if that's not a concern you have, if you're in this blue-based artifact archetype, it's hard for me to imagine doing much better than Moonsnare Prototype. And I think people should be more into this card. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't gotten the buzz I thought it would.
So people don't seem to be really hype or like talking up modern cards in standard sets on Twitter and the like. I think those discussions happen somewhere else.
Okay.
Because it's inevitable that if there is a card that is going to impact modern, on day one you see it in the queues a lot of the time. You see it in the league results and everything.
Yeah.
It's just, there wasn't a lot of hype around it because like the standard talk just generally eclipses it. So there's kind of like no point. It's like,
now, why is that still the case if we accept, and we don't have to accept this, but I just think like the narrative is standard is not as popular as modern at this point, and certainly not as popular as, things like Commander. So is it just our spheres where standard is still the dominating topic?
It's just the loudest people for the most part, because I think for like us as like content creators, it makes sense to like hype standard because it's like brand new, like, you know, more things from this set would impact standard than modern, right? So it's like every day, every couple days, you get to talk about like a new card, and it's this ongoing conversation. Whereas, you know, this or like cultivator colossus in Amulet, for example, is just like, yeah, okay, someone makes one tweet about it, and then like the discussion dies.
Yep.
And I think that is pretty similar to like what's happening here. Like, I think that people are excited about this card. But
Okay. And for what it's worth, like if you want this to be part of your artifact deck in standard, I think it can be too. Like
yes,
this card seems completely good enough to do that job to me.
yeah, it just depends on what the artifact deck actually looks like. And Reality Heist is the same thing, where I was trying to do it in a modern context and haven't really looked at all of the artifacts that exist in standard.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just doing the quick buzz through here, we have our Moonsnare prototype, we have our Mindlink mech, we have our treasure map silly thing, we have Sash is another artifact, also a creature. We can go, I mean, like our Savannah Lion, that cruise is also an artifact. So the artifacts really run deep in this set, and we can get those counts pretty high.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just like reality heisting into a Savannah Lions is not super
exciting. I agree with you. I agree. We don't need to do more than that. We also have like portable hole for removals. So you want to go real hard on the artifact synergies, you can kind of do so. I wonder what we're going to have when Brothers War comes around, which we would anticipate would be an artifact-centric set, and a lot of artifact support already.
So in addition to Reality Heist, I wrote about Prototype this week.
Okay.
And all of my decks looks maybe not busted, but definitely like this is very good. It just fixes so many problems where before, a card like Nettle Cyst, for example, where I was like, this is big, but it's just like so slow that unless things are already going pretty well for you, it doesn't really accomplish much. But when you just get to like jam it on turn 2, it's suddenly a lot more palatable.
Totally agree. I mean, I think like all those decks we mentioned before too, and obviously not KCI, but something like Lantern, which really has struggled under the absence of Mox Opal, something like the classic Urza decks, this could just be what it was missing. I think it really could be that simple. And yes, 1 is infinitely more than 0, for sure. I'm not trying to say this is the same card as Mox Opal, but
I mean,
you need a way to go to 3, basically, and you need a way to go to 4. And if you can do so effectively with something like Moonsnare Prototype, I start to believe again.
This pays for itself in some instances, certainly if you draw it later, right? So it's like Mox Opal that ETB's tapped in a lot of cases. But it's also easier to enable than Mox Opal in some instances.
For sure.
And it's fine in multiples. I don't know. It's like the thing that like sets you up, whereas like Opal kind of did its job once you already had some semblance of a board position.
Okay.
You know, like it wasn't really going to make mana on turn 2 every single time. Whereas this card probably will.
I would assume so, yeah. And then it gets to be a removal spell, which is like the part we keep glazing over, and is just...
It's because it's like, there are so many cases where if you draw it in like the first 4 turns, you're probably casting it, right? And then the removal spell is pretty expensive and is only going to happen on like turn 7. So it's like, it's not going to happen in a ton of games.
It's not, but you think about the scenarios that Urza routinely gets itself into, where you're just completely mana rich, and before you pull a Mox Opal off the top, and it's like you could almost always convert it into something. Like it was not entirely useless, but it was mostly useless. Now when you're pulling Moonsnare Prototype off the top, I think that's entirely different, and you can use it, you know, various resets, and the fact that it hits any non-land permanent in blue is also a big deal as well. Like you're dealing with all of your problem permanents that you could potentially face. So
I almost had a Lantern deck in my article, but for the most part, it was like, I don't know, cut 4 cards, add 4 of this thing. So it's not super interesting, but I definitely agree that it helps there. And Lantern was always a deck that was like, I guess I have to main deck like some Assassin's Trophies or whatever.
Right, yeah.
So this kind of like fills that gap. And for things like Urza, I think this is incredible for making it so that you can turn 3 Urza pretty consistently. Like some of those lists were even playing Talisman of Progress to be able to do that. You know, like this is certainly much better than that. And then this works with Paradox Engine, so I included one of those decks and like got the Reality Heist in there, and it was like I really don't know how to build this deck, but whatever. And then I had like an Azorius beatdown deck, which I think is pretty good. I had a Thopter Foundry deck, which seems pretty mopey and medium. And then I had an Arayo deck.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. I sent my Arayo
Nice.
deck to Michael Majors like 30 hours ago, and he hasn't responded despite being on Discord. And
Wow, that's messed up.
yeah, it is, dude. It's so messed up.
I would expect him above all people to be excited about an Arayo deck.
Yeah, you want to transform Arayo on turn 2. This makes it so trivial.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah, I think this card is absolutely great for Modern. I think that so many of the artifact decks were in like the tier 2-ish range, and this doesn't necessarily put them to tier 1, but it gets them very close. So I'm stoked about this card.
Same, right there with you, and everyone else should be as well. I demand you get stoked about Moonsnare Prototype.
It's weird to get excited about a Springleaf Drum, you know? But I think that this card will be remembered way more fondly than Springleaf Drum.
That says a lot. I mean, Springleaf Drum, an important card in Magic's history, I would say. So
yeah, but it's remembered about as fondly as Ornithopter, you know?
I think there's Ornithopter fans out there. You don't think some people love Ornithopter?
They do. I've just never met them.
Okay, sure.
March of Otherworldly Light. X dub instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you may exile any number of white cards from your hand. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. Exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment with mana value X or less.
I want white to be good at removal. I think it should be part of white's identity. This card, it's good. You know, in emergency situations, you can go ahead and get the discount with the exile. I don't think that'll come up too often. I think it's just supposed to be more of a catch-all for cheap permanents, at which case it's going to be pretty good. It's somewhat supplanted in the older formats, I would say.
It's a disembowel, which is not great because you're always paying more than what your opponent paid.
For sure. You need a specific type of deck that can benefit from this.
It's versatile. So I think having the pitch option is huge as long as, similarly to Solitude type of stuff, it's like you need ways to recoup the card advantage. And if you have that, this is a cycle, but if you have ways to recoup the card advantage, then these cards all seem pretty absurd, or like they have the potential to be absurdly good.
Yeah, I mean, especially if like you have a reason for wanting to play cards down, like you actually want to clear stuff from your hand. I could see all the marches being impactful. I just had to talk about this card here, though, because you can't talk about it on Discord because Discord's profanity filter will not let you post this image.
Oh, yeah, because the rabbit looks like a boob or something?
Because the rabbit looks like a boob. And their algorithm was like, nope, that's not getting posted. So when this card got previewed, a bunch of people tried to share it to our Discord and got shut down because they were sharing rabbit boobs.
That's funny.
It is quite funny.
It makes me wonder what the most like non-boob looking thing you could share that would be flagged would look like.
It's got to be this rabbit. It just has to be. I can't even think of anything else.
Yeah, I don't know.
It does kind of look like a boob though. Now that I'm looking at it for quite an extended period of time, I see what the algorithm's doing.
I don't know. If you don't take anything else into consideration, then maybe. But
I don't know how much I want to delve into the specifics of why I feel it looks a lot like a boob, but there's like an areola-ish type deal happening around the rabbit's tail. I'll just go look at the art.
I
judge for yourself.
I understand.
Judge for yourself.
I get it. Yeah, I don't know. This card is solid. It's fun. I don't know if you're going to play 4 of it or whatever.
Doubt it.
But it is interesting. I like having options. Options are great.
They are, and I like that this is a cycle. Very cool cycle.
Touch the Spirit Realm. 2 enchantment. When this enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature until this leaves the battlefield. And you can channel this for 1. Discard this, exile target artifact or creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step.
Super versatile blink effect that actually doubles as a removal spell. So, I love my versatility. I think this does that trick very well. There's a lot of benefits to blinking stuff in standard, in older formats as well. I think like the 3 mana removal spell, probably not going to cut it in older formats, but I don't know if this will be able to overcome its limited targets, like target artifact or creature. These Oblivion rings at 3 generally hit everything.
Yep.
So that's definitely a knock against it. But if you do benefit from this blink effect, really nice add for your deck.
So we don't have many great blink effects. Teleportation Circle is like really the only one, right?
Yep.
And that's
recursive one for sure.
Yeah, and that's like you have to really mean it. But this is like a removal spell you can play where if it's kind of dead against your opponent or in the situation, or because it's narrow, I could see that too, then maybe you get to save your creature from a removal spell, and that seems kind of nice. Or, you just have a deck with stuff that is worth blinking where this can be a removal spell if you want it. I don't know, two mana for a single blink effect is like not great on rate. 3 mana, very narrow Oblivion Ring is not great, but like with their powers combined, maybe.
Yeah. Also, like I said, extremely versatile card. It plays on offense as well. You can use it to remove a blocker in a
Sure.
pinch. So it just kind of does everything, and it doesn't do anything particularly well, but it does everything. And we'll see if that's enough.
March of Reckless Joy. XR instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you may exile any number of red cards from your hand. The spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. Exile the top X cards of your library. You may play up to 2 of those cards until the end of your next turn. You like this card or not?
No, I don't know what to do with it.
Oh.
I don't see anything. Like, where do you envision this mattering?
Okay, so say you're kind of mana screwed, right?
Yeah.
For 1 mana and a card in your hand, you can like basically transform this into like a double cycling effect. You know, it's like maybe like get your land drop, play a 2-drop or something, whatever. So I think early game, it's probably not that bad. And then, I mean, late game, you could go digging for as much as you want, really. The thing where I think it is interesting is when you're talking in the context of like the BRG Storm decks in Historic or like the Mono Red Storm decks in Legacy. Where it's like this is kind of interesting because you just have, you know, like an extra copy of Past in Flames, or like you just have a bunch of nonsense cardboard, right? Where you just get to cash that in to go digging for something else, and it seems like pretty strong in those sorts of decks.
Okay. I guess I also like the fact that it's an instant. So in scenarios where you're just like doing nothing, you can just like X's 4 at the end of your opponent's turn, have 2 cards to load up on. So maybe I wanted this to be sort of broken in its effect, and maybe it's just a good solid effect. Like it's more fair than I wanted it to be. And, you know, you're mentioning it in unfair context, but now as I talk about that particular play pattern, I kind of like an unfair context, just being your card advantage source. And you have to build around it for sure. Like you can't have a bunch of expensive stuff in your deck at that point. But as long as you're willing to concede that, I can buy this being important.
So like say you're playing mono red aggro, right? Like, and you really want to curve maybe like 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever. This can like kind of help you filter that out. Or if like, you know, maybe you drew too many of your 4-drops or dead removal spells or something against control, and it's like you just get to cash that in. It's like I could see playing like a couple copies of this in standard mono red.
What is interesting to me is there a way to benefit from exiling a bunch of stuff from your hand? Now, I guess it has to be specifically red cards.
Yeah.
I think if it wasn't red cards, I think you could find something to do in that vein.
Like the Eldrazi Scourge,
right,
Miss Hollow
right,
Griffin
right.
type of setup. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's a very fictional world that this card does not exist in, so probably not worth worrying about.
Yeah, but basically it's interesting, and I could see scenarios where it's very good, but also if you're like, well, I'm like kind of mana screwed, and you like pitch a card and spend a mana, and you just like don't hit any lands or whatever, it's like, well, you're probably screwed anyway. You know, you weren't drawing.
That is true.
But
you were not winning that game for sure.
But if you ever like pitch a card and spend some mana and then you can't recoup both cards out of it, it's pretty disastrous. So it's fairly high risk, which I also like don't want to flood on these necessarily. So I think you can only play a limited number of copies unless you are doing like the Storm deck thing. Then maybe you can just go ham. I don't know.
I'm curious if your deck is super low to the ground, like super low CMCs all over the place, if you can just like max on these.
I mean, you get like Shatter Skull Smashing as like a land to pitch to this, which is kind of cool. Spikefield Hazard is less good because if you're super low to the ground, you don't want the ETB tap land probably. But
right.
Yeah, you could probably do that too.
Well, that's interesting. I might explore that one.
March of Burgeoning Life. XG instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you may exile any number of green cards from your hand. The spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. Choose target creature with mana value less than X. Search your library for a creature card with the same name as that creature. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Do you like this card?
I want to like this card a lot more because I can see scenarios like what I would like to do with this card is get mana output, essentially.
Yes.
Like do the turn 3 Nissa thing where you just always have your mana accelerant. Now, I don't think that's strong enough for older formats, and the setup is not there in standard. So I was like, well, can you Lotus Cobra and just kind of go off that way? if it wasn't for the fact that it's mana value less, if it was less
I
than
know.
or equal, I think you
I
could do
know.
it. Less than though, I just don't know if I buy this card as actually being good enough.
Yeah, it's kind of gross in that way, but I was thinking about it where it's like, obviously, if you were able to go like Goldspan Dragon, immediately clone it, and like the card comes into play tapped or whatever, but it's like you can potentially get like such a huge mana advantage,
Yeah.
for playing this for 1 mana after you play like a threat that is actually good. But it's like the bigger it is, the more cards you would have to pitch, and they have to be green also. So it's like, you play, I don't know, just like a 1-drop. Well, you play a 2-drop on 2, and then like a 1-drop, and then like you use this to get another 2-drop and like pitch a card. It's like you're not even like really getting anything from it. It's like,
No.
what is the best thing that you can do? It's just like a 3-drop on 4 in this or something. It's weird, but context of like Pioneer in like the green devotion decks, I think using this to get like another Burning Tree Emissary might be good.
Okay, that's interesting. I was trying to like wrap my hand around it and Eternal Witness and what exactly you could do with those type of setups.
Oh yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, you're getting recursive with it, but I don't like. Obviously, when you hit a mana breakpoint, it's good. Like if you just hit a late game and you have these in hand, then it becomes very appealing.
Yeah, until they kill your creature in response. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this card has some like pretty big flaws, and the potential output is like enticing. I don't think it's going to get there though.
Yeah, there's just too many things. It's like they can kill your creature. It's less than X, which is pretty brutal, and it like doesn't really work at any spot on the curve, unless you play like Llanowar Elves on 1 maybe. But I basically like the idea of like, well, I'll pitch my hand to put another threat into play that's undercosted, and just like try and win the game that way. It's just really hard to figure out the scenarios in which this is actually good.
If your deck has all Dryad Arbors, you can curve into your Dryad Arbors.
Okay. Can you? Yeah, I guess.
I'm not saying you should. I'm saying I think you can. So you would have to lead turn 1 Dryad Arbor, turn 2 like Forest, get another Dryad Arbor, which is like, okay, you've earned yourself a rampant growth. Congratulations. And a very fragile one at that.
Ooh, I think I got it. What about the Bushwhacker decks in Modern? Because you have your Burning Tree and the mono green one, right?
Okay. It's interesting that, I mean, it's still obviously so fragile and
yes, but those decks are
line
fragile.
up so well.
Those decks
no, that's true. I don't think what they needed though was another fragile engine, right? Like they need some consistency probably.
Well, I think they like guaranteeing that you have like 3 Burning Tree Emissaries.
That's enough.
Is a good start. That gives you consistency at least to like what you're doing. And that deck was always about just like, okay, I'm going to shove.
Yeah. Huh.
Or what if there is a way to do like Phyrexian Dreadnought type of stuff where you're not keeping it in play? I don't know.
Oh, you want it to bin right away?
Or have a Pandemonium or something. I don't know. But I guess this is an instance that does work with like ETBs on this deck. I don't know.
It does.
Weirdness.
Yeah. Weird cards for sure. I think all the marches are kind of weird, but like it's really hard to make pitch cards be safe. Right? Like this is just a mechanic fraught with peril. I think these are safe and they're interesting. So good job. That's really tough to do.
So the white one being removal is like, okay, this is not going to be a broken thing. It might be like super efficient.
Yep.
But not broken. The red one, since it's capped at 2 cards, is probably not going to be broken either. But like this green one where you're thinking about like, can I get an extra thing into play on the cheap? Well, maybe that is good.
Maybe hardest hoops though, so there's good balance mechanisms there.
True, but as far as like one most likely to be broken, I think it might be the green one.
Okay, I could buy that.
All right, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, 2R Saga, Chapter 1. Create a 2/2 red Goblin Shaman creature token with whenever this creature attacks, create a treasure token. Chapter 2. You may discard up to 2 cards. If you do, draw that many cards. Chapter 3, exile this, return to the battlefield transformed under its control. And it is a 2/2 enchantment creature, Goblin Shaman. 1 tap, create a token that's a copy of another target non-legendary creature you control, except it has haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step.
Very wise to add a cost to this reflection of Kiki Jiki. Very smart. Maybe still a good card, though. I actually think the part I like the most about this is step 2 in the Saga transition, discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many cards. There's a bunch of decks that can just benefit from that effect. And again, like raw cardboard, what are we getting out of this? We get a 2/2 to start. If it attacks, it generates more cardboard in a treasure token. Then we get this loot effect, very powerful effect for sure in specific instances. And then we do all this and we get to this reflection of Kiki-Jiki, which we know how powerful this cloning effect can be. So if you're looking at your output from this 3-mana card, slow, it takes time, but just a huge amount of stuff being produced by Fable of the Mirror Breaker.
Right. I mean, it's worth noting that the backside does not have haste, right? So there is a delay there, unlike all of the stuff, basically. But like you said, you're just getting so much out of this card. It seems so good to me.
So that's interesting. I don't know that I had really fully it makes sense. I don't know that I've entirely internalized the fact that none of these are going to be effective as creatures on the turn which they transform, right? They have to reestablish themselves on the battlefield. And again, that's just part of the glacial slowness of these cards. It takes a lot of time.
It takes a lot of time, but you just get this is basically just a planeswalker, for 3 mana.
A lot of stuff, a lot of output.
So yeah, it's like the Bee Saga, for example, which I guess is on my list and we can talk about it at some point. But it's like it eventually makes a 2/2, and it's like it attacks on, I don't know, turn 30 or something. It really takes a long time to happen. It's just like all these cards have suspend. But I think in a lot of instances that's fine, because in the case of Fable, you're getting so much from the mana that you pay, and it's like stuff that has to be dealt with. So
I would agree. Yeah.
Plus, copying things is pretty powerful.
It can certainly break, and even if you have to spend a mana each time you do it, there's still ways to get payouts on that. You only need so many, whoever your copying thing is of choice, before your opponent is just dead. So
right. I'm not trying to go infinite with this so much as just have it be a value card, and for a red card, that's pretty exciting.
Yep.
White Dragon Time, Owl the Dawn Sky, 3/5/, 5/4, legendary creature, Dragon Spirit, Flying Vigilance. When this dies, choose one of two. Either look at the top 7 cards of your library, put any number of non-land permanent cards with total mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, or put 2 +1/+1 counters on each permanent you control that's a creature or vehicle. I like this as basically a top end for, I don't know, hopefully you get 2/2 drops off this or something, right? I think that would be super nice, but also if you have a pretty big battlefield, it incentivizes them to not kill this, because you can just pump all your stuff. But also for Storm the Festival type things, I think that this is a pretty powerful hit.
Yeah, good hit there for sure. I don't know what's wrong with me where I see a card like this and the only thing I want to do is figure out how to get 6 permanents out of this card when it dies. And that's just not going to do anything. Whether you can do it or not, it doesn't mean it's a good idea. And you could do Springleaf Drum style stuff and Ornithopters, and then where do you ultimately end up? I mean, maybe your next AO the Dawn Sky is good when it pumps everything up, but I think that one of the big problems I have with this card is that the type of decks that could benefit from having this top end, they just don't play top ends anymore. That's not really how it goes. And a lot of that was Divide by Zero, disincentivizing those things. So maybe with that card gone, cards like AO can come back into the fold a little bit. I feel like there must be a better option out there already, though. It just doesn't seem like it does enough.
So there's Resplendent something. It's 3/3/, 3/3 flyer, or maybe it's
Marshall. Marshall.
Guardians. I don't know. It's some angel that when you cast it, you get 2/2 drops. And I initially put that in some of the White Weenie decks I was playing, both as a sideboard go big option, and
the Revelark type thing, right? You get it from the bin. Yeah, I remember talking about this during previous season.
Yeah, and then it was maybe I'll just build a more mid-rangey white deck, and spoilers, the beatdowny one was much stronger, and you didn't really need the sideboard plan. And this one is kind of worse, but kind of better, where A, you have the option, but B, it's a dies thing, so it protects you against sweepers, whereas the other one was well, I hope they sweep me and then I get to cast this, but this is way more punishing against sweepers. So
it is.
I think that this card is better, despite having kind of bad experiences with a similar card, but also this in a mid-range deck where you mostly do have powerful 2 mana cards, and you have Storm the Festival to hit this thing, and like that just chains you into like more and more resources. It's like really tough to actually run you out of gas, which is pretty nice.
There's also nothing wrong with this. Just go ahead and like finding your Asika's Chariot, right?
Yeah.
And rebuilding in that fashion. So
yeah, that's true too. So I think that this one is a little bit better, but yeah, I mean, at 5 mana, there is a lot of competition for sure.
I like the idea of Storm the Festival. That's the best spot I've seen for AO thus far. And actually, some like green-white Storm the Festival stuff has been doing okay in post-ban standards. So.
Yep. Rabbit Battery. R1/1 artifact creature, equipment rabbit. Haste. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 in haste, and you can reconfigure for R. This is a Raging Goblin that can haste up further things for 1 mana. We've seen how good Reckless Stormseeker is. This is not nearly as good, obviously, because you have to pay a mana for it. But like, it's still pretty cheap. And if you're just actual legitimate like mono red aggro, you could do worse than this.
Agreed. There's good options for these cheap mono red plays, and I think the deck is sorely lacking them right now. So good to see those added.
Yeah, this actually gives you something to start with. You know, if you can't start on 1 mana, you're probably playing a mid range deck, which makes me happy, but is not really what you want to be doing. So we have the tools for it now.
Good to see.
Okiba Reckoner Raid. Yeah, that's the Rat Biker Gang. All right. B. Enchantment Saga. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 are both each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Chapter 3, exile the Saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. 2/2, Menace. Vehicles you control have Menace. And I like that it references vehicles because it's like, oh, well, your thing has summoning sickness, but if you're playing this in like a vehicles deck, then that kind of just pays for itself.
Yeah, a little weird because I expect the vehicle's color to be like blue-white, so it's sort of strange to see it branch out to black here, but maybe as the set fills out, that'll make more sense. And it's the exact same thing I keep saying about all of these cards. Like for 1 mana, you get essentially shock your opponent's face, gain 2 life, and a 2/2 with upside. Like
Menace
absurd.
is good.
It's absurd output. It just is glacially slow. So
I mean, it's slow. It's just like these decks don't have a ton to do on turn 1.
No, they don't. That is fair.
And this set has like a lot of 1 mana cards, and I kind of like that it's like you're not playing Usher of the Fallen or, you know, Goblin Guy type of stuff or whatever on turn 1 and just like immediately pressuring your opponent. It means that the game is going to get super exciting around like turn 4 because like a lot of things are going to be happening, right?
Right.
And the game starts early. You have stuff to do with your mana, so it feels good. It feels like you're progressing, but it's not just like, well, you're under a ton of pressure and you have to really like react right now or else you're going to lose the game. So I kind of like this actually.
Question is really going to be, is there something that has like the high crew numbers that we're looking, like a crew 4 type setup where it has a really big threat and you can combine it with the other things that pump crew size and all that stuff has to come together. There is like Surge Hacker Mech, which is 4 colorless 5/5 menace. When Surge Hacker Mech enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to twice the number of vehicles you control to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. I kind of like that card. Like the support around it has to be really strong before I'm into this. Unfortunately, this already has Menace, so it's not really benefiting from Okiba Reckoner Raid. But still, I think all of this stuff mushing together maybe has a chance as long as we have enough top-end payout on our vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, Tezzeret is a pretty solid top end if you are in blue, right?
Okay, yeah.
I think that there's not going to be a shortage of like 4 mana powerful cards you could play as a top end.
What about the vehicles, though, that have like the intense crew costs that are still worth playing? I think it's just like a card type that is really hard to make. And something like this, which is a removal spell tacked on, and you know, it should always do 2 damage, right? Because it has itself to count.
Right.
And that's pretty appealing to me. Like, I think you're getting enough out of that card. I actually kind of wish we talked about this card because I think the output is, again, nice on this.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of cards to talk about, right? So
sure.
We're not hitting everything, I guarantee you.
Very true.
Maybe check back in for our top 10 list or whatever, and then you can yell at us for things that we missed.
Going to be tough. This is going to be a tough top 10 list.
Dude, it really is. Okay, final card. Takanuma, Abandoned Mire. Legendary land, tap, add B, channel, 3B, discard this, mill 3 cards, then return a creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. This costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. This is just like Jund incarnate on the land.
Yeah, good little bit of value. Whatever your best threat is, you get to squeeze a little bit more out of it. The world where I could do this and bring a Bloodbraid Elf back to my hand and, get all that power tied up in just my land is definitely a world I want to live in. I don't believe it's the world we presently live in, but wow, would that be great. Even just doing stuff like getting back your Death Shadow, though, that's going to matter.
Ooh, yeah, that's legit. Yeah, I like this card. It seems like one of the more impactful ones. I mean, I guess you could make the case for like all of them being pretty impactful.
All of
but
them.
it's
Yeah,
like
they all matter.
But it's like you are definitely playing the one and you're super happy about it. And I could see playing a second, or like when you sideboard into something a little bit bigger in grindier matchups, then you play the second copy in the sideboard or something. So I like this card a lot. And then I don't know, there might even be decks that are like built around recursion. Maybe not for this format in this age, but it's like I could see a world maybe in where decks would want to play like 2 or 3 of this.
Sure. The safest wild cards you could spend during the release window are on these 5 legendary lands. Make one of each. I don't think you'll regret it for even a second.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you could also just save the wild cards, not play with them, and be a little bit more cost efficient, and you would still probably be fine. It's like if we were talking about like building a budget version of like these decks, it's like we would probably not include these.
If that was our goal, I'm sure there's probably more important cards to play, but these cards aren't going to go to waste, basically, is the way I would look at it. Whereas other crafts, you're like, oh, is this actually going to pan out in the metagame? These cards will all matter in the metagame. So,
yeah, I don't know. So, like, there are the things where it's like, oh, what cards are safe to craft or whatever. It's like these are technically safe to craft because they're definitely going to see play. They're future proof, but it's just like it's not necessarily the best way to spend your wild cards if you're light. So,
yep,
it's kind of awkward. Like if I do play Arena with this set, which I imagine I probably will, even though I'm not happy about it. Dude, I skipped Alchemy,
yeah,
or mostly did. I had to craft some stuff for content, but
yeah, I crafted a bunch of stuff and it all got nerfed. So
that's fine. I'm sure you got wild cards as compensation.
Nope, I did not.
Well, no, you should feel good because you're good at identifying the powerful cards, right?
I am. Thank you for rewarding me.
Yeah, your reward is the 5,000 gold.
They're gone.
No, the 5,000 gold you won playing with your busted cards.
Great. I won't spend it all in one place.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like there are so many things I want to try, which it's like, oh well, Arena makes the games pretty fast, but at the same time, it's like I don't want to invest $200. Not because it's just like, oh, that's an exorbitant amount of money, like it's a tax write-off for work or whatever, so it's not that bad. But I just like don't want to reward them.
You can only speak with your wallet. That's the only language that a corporation is capable of listening to.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, does it matter? Probably not, but whatever.
Probably not. But remember, as we established much earlier in the cast, nothing matters. So, do whatever you want. Be happy. Be kind. That's all I ask.
Be kind. I appreciate that. That is a good one. It's so simple, but should be probably at the forefront of people's minds a little bit more often than it is.
Agreed.
Game.
Good luck.